In this video, we're going to be talking about slant asymptotes, which are otherwise known as oblique asymptotes. So in this example, we're going to be finding the slant asymptote of f of x equals x squared minus x over x plus 2. Now, we already know what it is, but let's talk about why we know that. So let's start by finding our vertical asymptote. And we find our vertical asymptote by taking our denominator and by setting it equal to 0. When we solve, we see that x equals a -1, which is our vertical asymptote. So that's our vertical asymptote. For the horizontal asymptote, if I look at my numerator, I have a degree of 2. But if I look at my denominator, I have a degree of 1. Because the numerator's degree is larger than the denominator's degree, then that means I have no horizontal asymptote. Clearly from our graph, we have a slant asymptote though, and let's talk about how we get that. We can use either synthetic or long division to get that. We're going to go ahead and use synthetic this time. So we're going to take our numerator, which is 1, -1, and 0, and we're going to divide that by, it's really just our vertical asymptote, because we're supposed to take our denominator and set it equal to 0 and solve, which we already did to find our vertical asymptote. So I'll take that -1. So I'm going to bring down my 1, and then I'm going to multiply. And -1 times 1 is a -1. And when I add those together, that's going to give me -2. And now it's time to multiply again. So -1 times 2 is going to be a +2. And when I add these, I'm going to get a 2. And I'm going to write my solution that the answer, remember, if this is an x squared, by dividing it, it drops it to an x. It drops it a degree. So this is going to be an x minus 2 plus my remainder, which was 2 over x plus 1, which was our denominator. Now this piece right here, this is our slant asymptote. And we'll use SA for short for our slant asymptote. So we would say our short asymptote, or excuse me, our slant asymptote is y equals x minus 2. Let's do an example where we're going to sketch that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to sketch the graph of f of x equals x squared minus x minus 2 over x minus 1. So to sketch this, we need to find all of our asymptotes or holes. So I'm going to start by factoring this, which is x minus 2 and x plus 1 over x minus 1. And really all that does for us is these values right here, because we can't cross anything out, these are our x-intercepts. So we could graph those if we want to. So when we have x equals a -1 and x equals a 2. So we know the graphs are going to cross right there. But we also need to find our vertical asymptote. So to do that, remember we take our denominator and we set it equal to 0. So we'll take x minus 1 and set it equal to 0. And that's going to give us an x equals 1. Then we're going to take a look at our numerator and our denominator at their degrees. And we see that the numerator has a larger degree than our denominator. And that tells us that for the horizontal asymptote, there isn't one. So now we need to check and see if there's a slant asymptote. And so in order to check for that, we're going to use synthetic division. So we will use our 1, -1, -2, and we'll divide that by our 1. So we'll go ahead and we'll bring down our 1 so that we're able to multiply. And 1 times 1 is 1, and we'll add those and get a 0. And then we'll multiply those and get a 0, and add and get a -2. So remember, this represented x squared, so this represents x. So we have x minus 2 divided by x minus 1. So our slant asymptote is that. So y equals x is our slant asymptote. So let's go ahead and graph our asymptotes really quick. So we have an asymptote at x equals 1. And we have a slant asymptote of y equals x. And now we're ready to make our table. So we have a vertical asymptote at a 1, and we'll do 2 numbers before and 2 numbers after. And we know we won't have a value there. So let's go ahead and let's use the points 0 and -1 and 2 and 3. So we can go ahead and we can plug this in using our calculator. So if we pull up our calculator, we can plug this equation in to use the table. So alpha y equals, and then x squared minus x minus 2 over x minus 1. And let's go to our table. So we're looking for a -1 and a 0. So -1 has a value of 0, and 0 has a value of 2, so we'll write that down. And when we go to 2, we get a 0, and 3 is a 2. And so now we can plot our points. Notice that 2 of our points ended up being the x-intercepts, so that's nice. And we'll just finish graphing those using our nice curved lines going towards our asymptotes and following along them. Remember, getting really close but not touching or crossing. And we're done.